let's talk about Flux. So I hit another block on Flux yesterday, so I'm super stoked about that. That's like 3 in a week. We had 2 days of nothing, but we did get another one yesterday. So that's 3 blocks total with like 350 solutions a second, which is amazing. And things look to be getting even better because originally with the price of Flux as it sits right now, it was super difficult to even fathom getting to the point of being able to create a node at all. You needed so much Flux that it would cost tons to go ahead and create a Flux node, and I definitely wanted to get into that so that eventually I could create a guide for it. Now, the other part about creating a guide for a Flux node is the fact that typically you need probably at least 2, maybe 3 sets of the amount for the node to create the guides. Now, I've done master node guides in the past. They are very expensive to do guides for because if you want to do it right, it's hard to go ahead and go through the process a single time and get everything into the tutorial correctly the first time. And then on top of that, you know, it costs money, the amount of Flux to build those nodes every single time, especially when we're talking about something that takes an initial investment. So I'm happy to see this. It does mean that I can get close at some point to actually creating a node guide for you guys and sharing it. There are node guides out there. You can follow the official documentation. It's probably going to work out fine, but like I like to do, I like to have a guide for you guys on this channel as well. So I'm excited about this, and it's a tweet that came out, I believe it was yesterday, or let's see, I guess it came out on December 28th, but we have more information. So, new node structure launching in Q1 of 2022 with revised hardware and collateral requirements. The Cumulus node is now 1,000 Flux. The Nimbus mode is 12,500 Flux, and the Stratus is 40,000 Flux. Plus a new entry-level node launching in Q2 or Q3 will be the Cirrus, which is 5 to 100 Flux for one. Now, the important part is there are hardware requirements that will also change, and here's the details below. So your collateral is the 1,000, right? And then these are the VPS requirements that you're going to have. Part of this is due to the fact that the way that Web3 is hopefully going to function is that people will be utilizing this to essentially rent out virtual private servers to run applications on, whether that be anything from a website to something along the lines of a Minecraft server. So you have on the 1001, you need more than 2 cores and more than 4 threads. And then you need to have the ability to run 320 events per second on 4 threads. You must have 8 gigabytes of RAM or more, 220 gigabytes of storage or more. You need to have a disk write speed of those at above 180 megabytes per second. And this says you're going to need basically an SSD for the Cumulus and Nimbus, and you'll need an NVMe or SSD disks in RAID 0 for the Stratus, because that's going to be above 400 megabytes per second required above that. Now, technically an SSD can run at up to like 480 megabytes per second over SATA, but you know, translation of that through a virtual private server setup is a little different, sort of. And I'm assuming at this point that it's not going to necessarily always. Anyways, there's probably some latency and other things that are going into there that are making them basically specify this. Either way, the interesting thing is going to be like, how much does that translate in cost to a VPS? We'll probably be covering that because that will be a monthly cost if you're going to host it in the cloud. One of the issues with Web 3.0 that I do want to bring up that I've been talking about a little bit on Twitter, especially when it pertains to Flux. And this is a problem with Web 3.0 in general that they're going to have to figure out how to solve. If you have a significant investment in a node, and then you are getting payouts based on the uptime of that node, you are inclined to utilize already existing virtual private server or hosting options such as AWS or Azure from Microsoft or Google services, and or even something like DigitalOcean or Vultr, right? We've used a lot of Vultr and guys before on this channel. We've used DigitalOcean as well, and that's because you want that 24-hour uptime. The problem is that you end up re-centralizing everything, because if the point of Web 3.0 is to get off of centralized servers, but you're basically just end up hosting all of the nodes that are basically running these VPSs per these stats, so that you don't have any downtime, you're just essentially re-centralizing everything back to those cloud hosting solutions once again. And so, as a responsible participant of the network, ideally your goal would be setting up your own infrastructure, which I'll be trying to talk about here at some point, because once I get internet in at the mining facility, we will be setting up our own server stack. I have some old Dells. We'll be utilizing those, and we will be putting them, in HA failover, going over all of that with like a VMware stack. That's what I used to do for a living, by the way. So at least from that perspective, I should have enough knowledge to be able to show you guys how to do it. From a responsible perspective or a principled participant within Web 3.0 ecosystem, this is something you probably want to consider. The reasoning why is, while you will have, essentially a larger chance of, having the node down, running the node yourself and trying to take all of those things into account so that you basically are providing something to the network that is truly decentralized, would be ideal. Okay. But I understand that being an idealist isn't necessarily in the profit. So this is kind of the problem with Web 3.0 that I recognize that hopefully we can figure out how to resolve in the future. Storage is another one. This is also going to be a problem, obviously, on the consensus mechanism portion of Ethereum 2.0 post-merge, which I have talked about in the past. The rest of the stats here, internet speed greater than 25 megabytes a second up and down on the Cumulus. These are going to go up to 50 megabytes a second up and down on the Nimbus, and 100 megabytes a second up and down on the Stratus. There is no mention here of necessarily anything that is like latency driven, but I'm sure there will be latency requirements here that will be talked about. Now, when you talk about the devices, this is what I was talking about before, good VPSs, so DigitalOcean, Vultr, those are examples, or even going into AWS or Azure, etc. You can also rent those dedicated servers. It's usually denoted within VPS solutions as bare metal. And bare metal means that basically you're getting access to the bare metal of whatever server that is. And then from there, you can go up. Now, there are self-hosting servers, which is the last option here that I did discuss. And that would be what I would call the ideal state of all of this that you would want to get into. So here are also, we do have the update for the newest one, which will be the smallest one, the Cirrus. Collateral required is 5 Flux, but that's still to be determined. It'll take more than 2 cores, more than 4 threads. You will need the 320 events per second available on the 4 threads, the 8 gigabytes of RAM, 220 gigabytes of storage, 180 megabytes a second on the disk write speed, and 25 megabytes up and down. So this is saying, though, devices that you could run it on, which definitely you could run in your house: an NVIDIA Jetson Nano, an NVIDIA Jetson Xavier, an NVIDIA Jetson AGX Orion, a Raspberry Pi 4B, which is awesome to see, a Honeycomb LX2, and then, of course, it goes into the VPS solutions. We will probably, when this launches, do a Raspberry Pi guide, because we do have some Raspberry Pis that we're running other nodes on, specifically, I believe, Ravencoin. And then, I don't know. I probably have done another one. I think I have like 4 running, but I don't remember what they all are for, actually, off the top of my head, because none of them make any money. But this would be a way to utilize a Raspberry Pi to generate some additional revenue. Pretty cool stuff. So that's where we're at with the Flux node updates and how much it's going to take essentially to both stake into it as well as run the nodes for the system. Super awesome. I think that it's great that we're having some smaller options. I'm really excited to see an option to run a Raspberry Pi, because obviously, like, that's going to open up more decentralization for the network. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to provide the amount of power needed for Web 3.0 applications as a whole. That's cool enough to, like, you know, run like a dev stack on or something maybe, but not really anything significant, I think. So I still think the Web 3.0 problem to solve is going to be getting off of those centralized services at the end of the day. How that happens, when that happens, is yet to be seen, because at this point, to be honest, I don't really see a really quick path to that, meaning like this is probably decades out before that something like that's resolved. It will probably be resolved with something like, you know, mobile devices, cell phones. That would be kind of where I would think it would end up moving towards as far as like Web 3.0 processing. I hope you enjoyed this clip from the Crypto Mining Morning Show every Monday through Friday, 7:45 a.m. Pacific and 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time. You can check out more clips here, or if you're interested in checking out the entire live show, you can check that out down here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Tuesday.